In this video, we're covering a trail of terrifying supernatural occurrences, horrible mishaps, and creatures of another species manipulating innocent people. One of those innocent people were that of an everyday man who was all alone. In 1996, Abilene, Texas, Brian Bethel was sitting in his car late at night at a strip mall, just minding his own business after a shift at the local newspaper, writing a check to drop off and pay his cable bill. But even though Brian was in his car alone, and late at night this parking lot would have likely been empty, he noticed something strange in his peripherals, something odd, something that caught his attention for sure. And when he noticed this motioning commotion out of his driver's side window through his peripherals, he decided maybe I'll check to see what this is. And he looked up, glanced through his driver's side window, and what he noticed was a group of kids standing right there outside of his driver's window, staring directly down at him, catching him completely off guard. You could imagine this probably was a completely unsettling moment for him at this hour late at night in a strip mall parking lot. Where are their parents? Where is their vehicle? In a random place like this. And well, as Brian looked up to meet the gaze of these kids, he had every reason to feel defensive, unnerved, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up as he was slowly trying to make out just what he was looking at. I mean, it was dark, but there were streetlights in this parking lot, and as they were reflecting off of the pavement, they were also casting a glow on the faces of this group of kids. And what he saw in that moment was completely unnatural. Supernatural, maybe. As Brian was looking at this group of kids and they were looking directly back at him, and he was starting to make out what he was seeing before his very eyes, well, their eyes were black. I mean, completely blacked out. No color whatsoever, no white, nothing, not even a reflection. It was almost like they were lifeless eyes. And he was picking up on their appearance pretty quickly. As Brian started cranking his window to let it down and talk to these kids to figure out what was going on, maybe they needed help and he might have been the only adult nearby, well, everything started to sort of unfold in that moment. And from the reports of Brian's interaction with this group of kids, he described their voices to also sound unnatural. This group of kids were speaking in unison, like they were saying the exact same thing at the same time in a dark tone, in a stale, monotone voice, and he described it to sound almost like it was a voice that was too mature sounding for how old these group of kids looked. Didn't match up, didn't feel right. Well, unknown to Brian at the time, but this wasn't the first occurrence of kids like this. In other parts of the world, there were also reports of the same occurrences of other groups of kids in other areas that had exactly the same characteristics, completely blacked out eyes and dark, deep voices speaking in unison in a monotone voice. And those reportings were covered by an author named Jason Offutt, who taught journalism at Northwest Missouri State University, researching what he would call the black-eyed children for more than 10 or 20 years. He had interviewed people from around the world who had claimed that they had seen, talked to, and been around these kinds of unsettling groups of children that Brian had just met. In some of his research statements, he would recount different quotes of things that he had documented. Things of people saying their eyes are like rat's eyes, just black. Nothing, no iris, no pupil, no white, just completely gone. And the children from all of these documented reportings also had other things in common, all appearing to be school-aged, anything from kindergarten to high school. But it wasn't just their ages that they had in common. They all also appeared to be wearing a sort of old, vintage, if you will, sort of clothing. A sort of clothing that didn't really fit with the times at which these sightings occurred. And in one particular circumstance, one of these people that reported seeing these kids described them to be wearing that of a sports team logo of a shirt and clothing that had since stopped playing as a sport 10 years prior, and it still looked brand new as if they had just bought it. And in all of the other accounts that Jason had covered, all of these kinds of kids from around the world would also have a certain method, strategy, and structure to how they would approach the people, the innocent adults that they would go up to. They would plead to whoever they would interact with, asking for favors of them. Things like if they could make a phone call, if they could enter an establishment, or in Brian's case, if he would give them a ride. But when they would meet anyone who would tell them no, rejecting their request and plea for help, it wouldn't just be an end to a conversation there and be on their merry way. It would escalate. It would get a little bit aggressive. Their tone would become a little bit angry, and they would become a lot more insistent that that innocent person help them. A key element of these worldly, or rather otherworldly encounters relate to are things of much older tales, but too much of a similar origin to ignore, like that of devils or vampires. And it's that those people, or maybe those beings, and in this case those black-eyed children, they need to be approved of. They need to be invited into a person's personal space, into their home, into their car, to have any sort of power or leverage over the person they're talking to. And eventually, if they're rejected, they just kind of wander off into the night. Like when someone is just going about their day or night, and unknowingly, they're in the presence of these black-eyed children. The defenses are lowered. They're having a casual moment, like writing a check for their cable bill, as Brian was. They are taken advantage of. Those kids manipulate those adults in that moment. But in this circumstance, it wouldn't just deal with inviting kids into your space that had the blackest eyes, spoke in unison, or had the darkest monotone voice. These dark stories and victim accounts trail up the research of author Jason Offutt. It's more now than just inviting a group of unsettling, unnerving, creepy kids into your home. It's now inviting death and destruction into your livelihood. Even in those other parts of the world, there are other things of lore that people have experienced. Other things like Irish folklore, where they describe beings that look like humans, but are not anything far from a human. The stories of changelings, fairy babies that are swapped with humans. When those beings are born, they take on whatever human they are embodying. Same voice, same look, same demeanor, but an evil, devilish sort of presence. That author, Jason Offutt, talks about the lore of these black-eyed children, describing their goals and the mythology behind them of how they are much older beings than they come off to look as, waiting, lurking to take advantage of any adult or human that is going to be helpful and nurturing to an innocent child in need. But that's how they get you. Their methods in pleading and asking for help, like as a person of Brian's situation, alone in a dark parking lot with this group of kids that needs his help, while this author thinks this is completely strategic and it's how they choose to look. An innocent group of kids. Another professor at Montclair State University has also given statements on their own research of these black-eyed children, saying that people have let them in past accounts, and disastrous things have happened, like deaths or cancerous diagnosis, after the children have left their presence of their innocent victim. They look like something familiar, as we would think a child should look like, but they're absolutely not. In the myth of what a child is, they represent something new, a new birth, a fresh start to life. But that's not what these creatures are at all. This professor at Montclair State University had also stated that even one of their friends had encountered at 3 a.m. a group of these black-eyed children pounding on their front door, and that was before they'd ever researched known about it or talked about it with their friend. They knew nothing about it, but that accounting of that situation happened to them. And in this case, in Brian's case, well, this was probably late at night at 7 or 8 p.m. when he was in his car in that strip mall parking lot writing his check, when these kids went up to him and he was trying to get to the root why they were there and why they needed to talk to him specifically. And well, they asked him to give them a ride to their mom's house because they wanted to go purchase some movie tickets for that night. But something was further odd about this. Not only did they have blacked out eyes, speak in unison, and have this monotone voice, but the movie they wanted tickets for had started an hour before they were even at his car. Well, Brian's instincts were telling him something was completely off. Not only did these kids have these black eyes and were asking about movie tickets to take them to their mom's house, he was sensing some sort of danger, and when they asked him for this, he had enough, and he threw his car into reverse and backed out of there. But when he looked back up at them, they were gone. As Jason Offutt, this author, said, well, it's unnerving because we don't know what they want or what they're going to do to us, what they might do with the situation once we let them into our personal space. And in Brian's circumstance, they could have done some serious damage to him as they are these otherworldly beings. He could have died. After Brian had moved on later from this encounter with these black-eyed children, he wrote about it in the Abilene News Reporter, and ever since then, it's been covered countless times around the world. Different people meeting these kinds of beings, these black-eyed children that are not human. His story in that parking lot happened about 30 years ago, but ever since then, well, authors, researchers, journalists alike have all agreed that what this is really the embodiment, the personification of death and evil that takes on the form of children trying to manipulate innocent people who want to help them. Do you think you or anyone you know has ever seen these children out and about wandering for their next victim? And if you did, would you help them? How would you handle it?